Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are finishing journal collection number 44, and I don't even know where we are actually, in the middle of the year somewhere. Like I had mentioned before, he has gotten away from writing the dates on things, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just harder to reference where you are in the year. So, with that said, I will read whatever is next in the journal, so that'll be clear enough. What Englishman has idealism enough to lift the horizon of brass, which shuts down like an umbrella close around his body? When did he ever pierce his fogs to see the awful spinners and weavers that spin and weave and cut so short his web of rank and money and politics, and interrogate the vital powers that make him man? Since Shakespeare never won, and Shakespeare only for amusement of the playhouse. The power of fate, the dynastic oppression of submind. Nature shows everything once without need of microscope or anatomical dissection. It does not need barometer to find the height of mountains. The line of snow is surer than the barometer, and the zones of plants as the savin, the pine, the L'Oreal odorante, vernal gentian, acontum, napellus, geum, Linnea borealis, and the various lichens and grasses are all thermometers which cannot be deceived and will not lie. They are instruments by the best maker. She shows the pila in mullein, the spirals in hyacinth, the varicles in achara, chromate in the splendid sage. She shows every function once in great bodies. Once I wished I might rehearse freedom's pain in my verse, that the slave who caught the strain should throb until he snapped his chain, but the spirit said not so. The English mind flowered in every faculty. In the age when Europe awoke like a giant refreshed by sleep, when the Gothic nations brought the robust brain of unsunned barbarism into the warm regions of the vine and olive of Roman method and rule, the two forces of Judaism and of Greek genius were poured like sunlight and heat into it. The tables of their brain were like plates of iodine, long kept in the dark. Then the editor states that several pages are torn out. Nature is admirable, and exists for the present hour, as well as for the immense cycle, and whilst man is for eternity, for poetry, for love, yet he has a Greek, an English, and American career, which masks effectually the ulterior purpose from ordinary eyes. All the authors are enchanted men, intoxicated plainly with that stray drop of nectar of idealism they have imbibed. Bacon, rich with luster and powers, stolen somehow from the upper world, and inevitably wonderful to men, but he has this plunder of ideas, or this degree of fine madness to no purpose. He does nothing with it, it leads him nowhere. He is a poor mean fellow all the while, and in fine examples, in Milton, it is not much better. It is not yet blood, this drop of ichor that tingles in them, and cannot lift the whole man to the digestion and function of ichor, that is, of godlike action. If a divine physician could come and say, "Ah, you are hurt, you are bleeding to death, not out of your body, but, far worse, out of your mind. You that are reckoned the pink of amiable and discreet men, you are in a raging typhoid, already comatose, blind, and deaf. All the worse that you do not know it. Men run away from the smallpox, but see the smallpox of small society, the vermin, the tapeworm of politics, and of trifling city life is eating your vitals. Save yourself. I call you to renunciation of trifles, of display, of custom. I lead you to an upright and simple friend who knows what truth means. See that one noble person dwarfs a nation of underlings, makes the day beautiful and himself venerable, and you shall not fear to wake in the morning." Men have a greater range than we think. If a man knows 100 men, he treats each according to each's nature, and renders dust to dust and miracle to miracle. Ebba Hubbard is as sensible of the difference between Wheeler and Channing as of the difference between apple and turnip, and this quite irrespective of their clothes or money. We want a higher logic to put us in training for the laws of creation. How does the step forward from one species to a higher species and existing genus take place? The ass is not the parent of the horse, nor fish begets a bird, but the concurrence of new conditions necessitates a new object in which those conditions meet and flower. When the hour is struck in onward nature, announcing that all is ready for the birth of higher form and nobler function, not one pair of parents, but the whole consenting system thrills, yearns, and produces. It is a favorable aspect of planets and of elements. I think it wonderful, the beauty of the Greeks as contrasted with the unbeautiful English nursery stories, which, though now and then rarely admitting in their fable a natural fact, as of frost or effects of spring, to gleam through, yet in the main are childish and insignificant, like Bluebeard or Jack Giant Killer, whilst every word of the Greek is at once beautiful and also science. I think no man is insensible to the figures that adorn the pages of the almanac, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc., from the Greek mythology. Rest on your humanity, and it will supply you with strength and hope and vision for the day. Solitude and the country, books, and openness will feed you, but go into the city. I am afraid there is no morning in Chestnut Street. It is full of rememberers. They shun each other's eyes, and they are all wrinkled with memory of the tricks they have played, or mean to play, each other, of petty arts and aims all contracting and lowering their aspect and character. They have great need of fine clothes. I advise they must buy richer laces yet if they wish to hide their deformities. Don't spare money. Caesar offered to Venus, on his return to Rome, a corselet of British pearls. The Romans sent to England no mean man, but him in whom the power of that empire culminated, and he found in Britain a man in natural power as good as himself, though not so well equipped and seconded. The Britons of that day ran the painted bodies into swamps up to their necks, and had a receipt of temperance long lost since the island, of holding a morsel in their teeth for days to resist hunger, no bigger than a bean. D'Aguesseau was reading one day with the learned Bovon, I know not what Greek poem, and then there is untranslated French. Power, new power, is the talisman and lodestone which only a soul seeks. It cares not if it do not yet appear in a talent, or it likes it better if it have no talent. New power suggests vast hopes native to the mind. It sets it on experimenting, it brings it into creative moods. It does not promise to pay bills or build my house or barn, but it assures new expansions to religion, philosophy, science, and poetry. The university wholly retrospective. Milton, Juvenal, Homer, and the rest are old cups of which one cannot drink without some loss and degradation. The happy youth drinks at the fountain. A creator, Columbus is, and Newton and the astronomers, and Mackay with his clipper. So is Bull with his new grape, and Shakespeare. But now seldom or ever it comes of good college education, or having the grammar at the tongue's end. Nature made nothing in vain, neither poisons nor passions, and crimes are not absolute, but circumstantial and related to a higher harmony. Alcott was here, a baker who bakes a half a dozen worlds as easily as the cook so many loaves. The most obstinate Unitarian that ever existed. He only believes in unity. Plato is dualist to him. Pre-existence is as familiar and essential in his mind as hydrogen or sulfur in a chemist's laboratory. Metachemistry, his philosophy might be called with some show of truth. He believes in cause and effect, and comes out of such vast caverns up to the surface of conversation that he has to rub his eyes and look about him not to break the proprieties of this trifling world. He relies on nature forever, wise, omnific, thousand-handed nature, equal to every emergency, which can do very well without colleges, and if the Latin and Greek and algebra and art were in the parents, is sure it will be in the children without being pasted on the outside. Superlative. A head or face magnified loses its expression. Alcott tells me that Mr. Hedge is to write an essay on the importance of a liturgy. I propose to add an essay on the importance of a rattle in the throat. Women. How difficult to deal with them. You must interfere continually to steer their talk, or they will be sure, if they meet a button or a thimble, to run against it and forget all in the too powerful associations of the work table and the pantry. Can't keep it impersonal, can't keep it afloat in the stream. Mother Wit. Dr. Johnson, Milton, Chaucer, and Burns had it. Unless we had Boswell, we should hardly know how to account for Johnson's fame. His wit is so muffled and choked in his scholastic style, yet it animates that and makes his opinions real. Aunt Mary has it and can write scrap letters. Who has it need never write anything but scraps. Henry Thoreau has it. In this kingdom of illusion, life is a dream, in the language of the ancient. We change only from bed to bed. Henry Thoreau says he values only the man who goes directly to his needs, who, wanting wood, goes to the woods and brings it home, or to the river and collects the drift and brings it in his boat to his door and burns it, not him who keeps shop that he may buy wood. One is pleasing to reason and imagination, the other not. Editor's note: here follows much that is printed in Quotation and Originality. Letters and Social Aims, page 197. Quotation. Admirable mimics have nothing of their own. And in every kind of parasite, when nature has finished an excellent sucking pipe to tap another animal, the self-supplying organs wither and dwindle as being superfluous. And then there's an untranslated French quotation here, and it says it's from Grimm, Part 2, Volume 1, page 434. I often need the device of ascribing my sentence to another in order to give it weight. Carlyle does so with Teufelsdrockh. Quote, God Save the King, it seems, has been at last ascertained to have been composed by a man of the name of John Bull in the time of James I. End quote. Moore's Diary, Volume 4, page 148. The English despair of the heart. Thackeray seems to think God has made no allowance for it in his universe, so he renounces ideals and accepts London, so thought Elizabeth Hoare, or the like of this. But I thought how these antagonistic Bornés, Japanning English as they build Birmingham everywhere, as they trample on nationalities to reproduce London on the Londoner in Europe, in Asia, in America, so they feel and resent the hostility of ideas, of poetry, of religion. The Englishman sits there full of his own affairs. He has an oppressive personality, and with the best faith in the world, speaking or silent, puts upon the company with the importance of his things. If you could open his eyes to the insignificance of Oxford and London, Peel and Paxton, Rothschild and Manchester, on any true scale, you would shock him to the point of jeopardizing his human spirits and efficiency. English personality. I wonder what is that chemical element which so differences the Englishman from the Yankee. It sculptures his large head and bust, and gives the firm lines of strength and the repose of felt superiority. But the triumph of culture is to overpower nationality by importing the flower of each country's genius into the humanity of a gentleman. Poetry. What is called the revival of letters, or the letting in of Hebrew and of Greek mind on the Gothic brain, wrought this miracle and produced the English inspiration which culminated in Shakespeare. For 2 centuries England was philosophic, religious, poetic. As that influence declined, it cooled common sense into materialism again, and lost the fine power of transition, of imagination and unity, lost profoundness and connection. And a mind with this endowment, like Coleridge, Wordsworth, Swedenborg, is not only ungenial but unintelligible. Shakespeare's transcendences are only pardoned for his perfect objectiveness. The English mind now is superstitious before facts. Facts, they make a great ado about a truth. The oldest, mustiest formularies we expect from them and find. No deep apropos, no all-binding theory, no glimpse of distant relations in the quodam vinculum. There is poor smell and learned trifling and Locke instead of Berkeley. Books. Resources for a rainy day. Read Dryden's Aurungzebe, see Moore, Diary, 4, page 306. Sir Fulk Greville's Life of Sir P. Sidney. President Henault, and then there's a long French title here, which I'm not going to even try to pronounce. And then Galliani, another long French title, which I'm not going to butcher. The meaning of the famous saying of Jacobi and of Mr. Dean is the fact that the poet sprains or strains himself by attempting too much. He tries to reach the people instead of contenting himself with the temperate expression of what he knows. Sing he must and should, but not ballads. Sing but for gods or demigods. He need not transform himself into Punch and Judy. A man must not be a proletary or breeder, but only by mere superfluity of his strength he begets messiahs. He relieves himself and makes a world. Solitude of mind endangered in America by too much demonstration. Look at the sunset when you are distant half a mile from the village, and I fear you will forget your engagement to the tea party. That tent has a dispersive power not only of memory, but of duty. But the city lives by remembering. The main question of any person whatever is, does he respect himself? Then I have no option. The universe will respect him. Mirabeau said of Robespierre, quote, "That man will go far. He believes what he says." A hypothesis or algebraic x or unknown quantity must be signified until the truth can be arrived at. We are made logical, and are sure the missing link is there, though latent. We use semblances of logic. Expansion, warmth, power belong to every truth. The poet knows the missing link at once, as the lapidary knows the true stone from the glass and paste. I call those persons who can make a general remark, provided also they have an equal spirit, aristocrats. All the rest in palaces or in lanes are snobs, to use the vulgar phrase. Thus Picard, who knows how to measure a degree on the earth's surface, Vauban, who knows how to make a river and the rain avail to make fountains at Versailles, Cuvier, who sees his thought classify the creation anew, Geoffroy, Saint Hilaire, Laplace, Napoleon, I call nobles. All the grands seigneurs who prate after them are rabble. I call these fellows nobles because they know something originally of the world. If the sun were extinguished and the solar system deranged, they could begin to replace it. The town is the unit of the republic. The New England states found their constitutions on towns, and not on committees, which districting leads to and is. And thus are politics the school of the people, the game which every one of them learns to play. And therefore they are all skillful in California or on Robinson Crusoe's island, instantly to erect a working government, as French and Germans are not. In the western states, and in New York and Pennsylvania, the town system is not the base, and therefore the expenditure of the legislature is not economical, but prodigal. By district, or whatever throws the election into hands of committees, men are elected who could not get the votes of those to whom they are best known. I neglected to set down among the antagonisms of England that of the language which composes out of its Saxon and Latin threads a perpetual harmony. In all English rhetoric we use alternately a Saxon and a Roman word, often too Saxon, but never willingly or wisely too Roman, such as a popular body of 400 men, or a correct and manly debater. Mystic or theist never scared by any startling materialism. He knows the laws of gravitation and of repulsion are deaf to French talkers, be they never so witty. And it is characteristic of the Teutonic mind to prefer the idea to the phenomenon, and of the Celtic to prefer the phenomenon to the idea. Higher yet, shall I say, is it to prefer the idea or power to the thought, that is, to the idea once individualized or domesticated in one man's mind, as Shakespeare or Plato. Malthus existed to say, population outruns food. Owens existed to say, given the circumstance, the man is given. I can educate a tiger. Swedenborg, that inner and outer correspond. Fourier, that the destinies are proportioned to the attractions. Bentham, the greatest good of the greatest number. But what do you exist to say? We can do nothing without the shadow. The sun were insipid if the universe was not opaque. There is more memory in the world than we allow for. Other things remember as well as you. Gold always remembers how it was got, and curses or blesses according to the manner of its coming. I like to hear of any strength, and as soon as they speak of the malignity of Swift, we prick up our ears. I fear there is not strength enough in America that anybody can be qualified as malignant. Then there is a French quotation here, and I think it is in English here. It does not appear whence comes this line, oh well, but it is evidently the source in The Romany Girl, and of pale northern girls you scorn our race. That's the end of the note. Seems to me the plant man has more vigor, more means in Europe, and permits more absolute action. Excellent X, if I could write a comedy, should be the hero. He came with German enthusiasm sparkling out of his black eyes, and Miss Somewhat of Georgia wrote that if ever angel spoke in man, it was he. He came up country, and Mrs. S. and Miss W. were at his feet. J. was so affected by his eloquence that she could not speak to him. He complained and scolded to Mrs. S. that J. would not be acquainted with him, that he could not be acquainted with her. Well, at last they got acquainted, and he told J. that she was his ideal of woman and came daily there. She made him cakes and dinners and warmed his feet and sat up nights and stayed at home Sundays to make his shirts and make him fine. One day he came home to Concord, delighted with the notice of his lecture and the transcript showing it all. Fancy that Mr. R. or Miss P. or even L. in Boston or Cambridge might have done it. Could J. have any possible idea who had written it? Why, yes, said the happy J. I have some idea, for I wrote it myself. X was aghast. Never breathe that you wrote it, he gasped out with passionate solemnity, being infinitely mortified that no distinguished town body had been found to trumpet his fame. Wendell Holmes, when I offered to go to his lecture on Wordsworth, said, I entreat you not to go. I am forced to study effects. You and others may be able to combine popular effect with the exhibition of truths. I cannot. I am compelled to study effects. The other day Henry Thoreau was speaking to me about my lecture on the Anglo-American, and regretting that whatever was written for a lecture, or whatever succeeded with the audience, was bad, etc. I said, I am ambitious to write something which all can read, like Robinson Crusoe, and when I have written a paper or a book, I see with regret that it is not solid, with a right materialistic treatment, which delights everybody. Henry objected, of course, and vaunted the better lectures which only reached a few persons. Well, yesterday he came here, and at supper Edith, understanding that he was to lecture at the Lyceum, sharply asked him whether his lecture would be a nice interesting story, such as she wanted to hear, or whether it was of those old philosophical things that she did not care about. Henry instantly turned to her, and bethought himself, and I saw was trying to believe that he had matter that might fit Edith and Edward, who were to sit up and go to the lecture, if it was a good one for them. When someone offered Agassiz a glass of water, he said that he did not know whether he had ever drank a glass of that liquid before he came to this country. Women teach us how much. We wish to please them and say something they will like to hear and not weary them, and by often meeting them we gain practice and skill in this. Quote, "Such is the nature of modern governments that money is at once the most dangerous weapon and the strongest curb of despotism. The expenses of states exceeding always their revenues, they have a constant need of credit, which, subject itself to opinion, puts the potentate into dependence on those whom he rules. When money is wanted, it must be borrowed. But it is confidence which lends. Force can do nothing, for money can hide. Thus credit favors disorder. Disorder kills credit. The same causes operate to make the people never so happy nor so unhappy as they should be." Frederick Melchior Grimm. The Sciolist Oration. The young sciolist learns to say, "What is true in this is not new, and what is new is not true," and of Spanish literature, that the only good books is that which shows the worthlessness of all the rest. English results. England, an island famous for immortal laws and for sentiments of freedom which none can forget. Quote, "Hume's history could be entitled, 'The History of English Passions by the Human Reason,'" Cerruti. Quote, "The poet wounded," says Fiorucci, "writes a satire, and it remains to the day of the resurrection." "Fate makes," says the Turks, "that a man should not believe his own eyes." Editor's note. On the 16th of November, Mr. Emerson's mother, Madame Emerson, as she was usually called, died. A lady of character and dignity, combined with sweetness and piety. She had been 42 years a widow, and had brought up her 5 sons, who survived their infancy in such manner as always to keep their devoted love and reverence. In a letter to Rev. William H. Furness, dated December 18, 1853, Mr. Emerson wrote, "You speak of my mother. I cannot tell you how much my house has suffered by the loss of that one more room, one more home in it for me and each of us. Mamma was made to live, and her death at 85 years took us by surprise, and my wife mourns so many undone things. There was something majestic in one of those old strong frames built to live so tranquilly, usefully, and kindly. The later generations seem to me to spin faster. But one of these days we too shall be better than now. Then, now, and ever, your affectionate Waldo Emerson." To Carlyle, he wrote, "My mother died in my house in November, who had lived with me all my life and kept her heart and mind clear, and her own until the end. It is very necessary that we should have mothers, we that read and write, to keep us from becoming paper. I had found that age did not make that she should die without causing me pain. In my journeying lately, when I think of home, my heart is taken out." End of note. Elizabeth Hoare said, "The reason why Mother's chamber was always radiant was that the pure in heart shall see God, and she wished so much to show this fact to the frivolous little woman who pretended sympathy when she died." Dr. Frothingham told me that the Latin verse which he appended to his obituary notice of my mother was one which he had read on the tomb of the wife of Charlemagne in a chapel at Mayence, and it struck him as very tender. He had never seen it elsewhere, and it is given in English in the footnote, which I will read. "May her soul inherit the land which knows no sorrow." The poet cannot make his thought available for a law in the statute book, much less for a practical end in farming or trade. What then? Every thought is practical at last. Let him comfort himself that this respects a larger legislation and larger economy than now obtain, and that if he is faithful to it, it will introduce him to that better world of which it is sure announcement. The majority. Alas for the majority, that old inevitable dupe and victim. What a dreary Iliad of woes it goes wailing and mad withal. Some dog of a Cleon or Robespierre or Douglas or Butler is always riding it to ruin. Editor's note: Mr. Emerson was writing for his course of the next winter a lecture called France or Urbanity. A great many quotations from French statesmen or authors follow, but a few of which are given. End note. December. France. God will have life to be real. We will be damned, but it shall be theatrical. And of course, there are a ton of French quotations here, and they are not given in English in the footnote, so unfortunately I must skip over them. Mirabeau's father described him as having derived from his fathers the gift of command, and of adding to it that terrible gift of familiarity. And of course, the next part is in French. The last billet of Mirabeau to the Comte de la Marche, 9 days before his death, ends with these words, obviously in French. Notes for French lecture: nationality, true respect for learning and talent, Napoleon inexhaustible as Plutarch's heroes, every new book or trait or mot interesting. French inconsequent, English logical. I find a secondary tone in everything written in the French journals. The national vanity appears. England is never out of mind. Napoleon's devouring eye, before which nothing but reality could stand. French have gained so much. Before the Revolution, women were harnessed in the team with animals and felt the whip. Dumont, Apud de Quincy. The hopeless exclusion of the lower class, permitted only to offer their money on their knees, permitted only to die in the army, had no law, but chicane. Now they have a code, and a French lawyer can tell what the statute is. And then there's another couple of French quotations, and then something which is in English in quotations, which I will read. It is natural, the language of the most social people in the world, the language of the nation which speaks more than it thinks, a nation which needs to speak in order to think, and which thinks only to speak, ought to be the most dialoguing language. I observe that the dominant character of the French still pierces. They are talkers, reasoners, jokers by essence. A bad picture gives rise to a good pamphlet. Thus you shall speak better of the arts than you shall ever do in them. It will be found at the end of the reckoning in some ages that you will have reasoned best and best discussed what all other nations shall have best done. Cherish, then, printing. It is your lot in the world. And those quotations are from Galliani. All Europe was like a park to Balzac, where to meet his friends and admirers. Poland, Bohemia, Russia, Italy, Spain, Sweden. Then there is a French quotation untranslated. Then another French quotation and another French quotation. And finally back to English. Would you send a youth to learn Christianity or ethics or heroism in France? In England they spend for comfort, in France for pleasure, and the lighter-minded English go to France or establish a little France in England, and the soberer French, the Huguenot or Huguenotish, make a little England around them in France. I find the French awakening to alarm on the manifest decay of the Latin nations before the prodigious growth of the Saxon race. Bonaparte said, "In 25 years the United States will write the treaties of Europe," and Xavier Raymond in the Revue des Deux Mondes tries to rouse his countrymen to the fact that they have lost the world. Of Phillips, Garrison, and others, I have always the feeling that they may wake up some morning and find that they have made a capital mistake, and are not the persons they took themselves for. Very dangerous is this thoroughly social and related life, whether antagonistic or cooperative. In a lonely world, or a world with half a dozen inhabitants, these would find nothing to do. The first discovery I made of Phillips was, that while I admired his eloquence, I had not the faintest wish to meet the man. He had only a platform existence and no personality. Mere mouthpieces of a party. Take away the party, and they shrivel and vanish. They are inestimable for workers on audiences, that for a private conversation, one to one, I much prefer to take my chance with that boy in the corner. The liberator is a scold, a sibyl is quite another thing. The age has an engine, but no engineer. Editor's note. Lecturing meantime on the Anglo-Saxon and the Anglo-American, Mr. Emerson was, as time served, preparing his English Traits, which, however, was not published until 1856. A great part of the journals, V.S. and H.O., have been omitted as consisting of matter there printed. End note. This is the end of Journal Collection number 44, dating from the year 1853, when Emerson was 50 years old. Thank you for listening.